So, last week we started a little mini-series going through the book of Conjugial Love, because, hey, we haven't ever done that, and that's useful. And the first chapter in Conjugial Love was about, establishing what is conjugal love. And so we read an account from that last week about some adolescents who arrived in the next world, and they saw some beautiful women, and their lusts were clear to the angels. And the angels were saying, well, what you've got there, don't confuse with love. You've got lust, and what we're trying to take you to is a place where it's love. And the boys didn't quite understand in this account the difference, and that's what the angels were trying to teach them. So this week is kind of a continuation in the sense it's a different memorable relation. It's in a different chapter, but it's the next one that comes up, and it's in a chapter about the state of married partners after death. So it's kind of an odd placement, but it's an interesting occurrence because I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's kind of long, but it sets up with Swedenborg hearing this music in the other life. And it's beautiful music, and they start trying to figure out the source of this, and the angels basically say to him, oh, well, the lovely harmonies that you hear are a reflection of conjugal love, true, chaste love of the opposite sex. And once again, we have our foils come into the story saying, oh, what's that, and what do you mean just chaste love? It's, there's beautiful women. We should, of course, think of these things. And the angels say, simmer down, boys. Let's talk about this properly. So, with a bit of a setup here, because chaste isn't often a word we use in our vernacular these days, I thought I'd throw up here a definition, or in this case, 3 definitions from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I think it's interesting that it gives the innocent of unlawful sexual intercourse as one definition. I usually think about it as being this last one, pure in thought and act. But you know what? The two of them make sense, don't they? And when you look at kind of the, shall we say, sexual deviations that occur in the world today, a lot of people say, oh, well, the issue is this. But what the church would say is that generally the problem isn't a specific type of sexual unlawfulness, but it's a juxtaposition of lawful versus unlawful. So it's not just about, say, gay marriage. It's about sex outside of marriage, sex between married people who are not married to each other, all that kind of stuff. The church is basically a position of saying it's chaste love of the opposite sex versus unchaste. And all these other things that encapsulate sex that's outside of marriage is technically unchaste. So it's a huge umbrella that the church is saying, no. It's this goal to be pure in thought and in act. So that was kind of a little bit of a setup. I'll read the story now and kind of keep this definition in your mind as to what these newly arrived spirits are talking about and discussing. And what I think you'll see is that it's not, unchaste love isn't just about a narrow definition. It's a fairly broad definition. So here we go. So the spirits standing around asked what a chaste love for the opposite sex was. And they heard a voice say, examine and discuss this love. Suddenly, too, spirits from various societies were present, and in the midst of them some angels in white. And the angels then addressed them, saying, we have inquired into all kinds of love in this spiritual world, not only into the love of a man for a man, and of a woman for a woman, and into the mutual love of husband and wife, but also into the love of a man for a woman, and a love of woman for men. We have been allowed to pass through society after society as well, and to investigate. And we have not yet found the prevailing love for the opposite sex to be chaste, except in those who, because of their true married love, are in a constant state of sexual ability, and these are in the highest heavens. Moreover, we have been granted to perceive an influx of this chaste love for the opposite sex into the affections of our hearts, and we have felt it exceed every other love in its sweetness, except the love of two married partners whose hearts are one. But we pray you examine and discuss this love, because to you it is new and unknown. And also because it is so exceedingly pleasant in heaven, we call it heavenly sweetness. Just pause for a second there. I think it's really useful for us to realize that the angels are saying, it's good to discuss this because to you it's new and unknown. And that's probably the case of most of the world today. Most of the world today doesn't really get marriage love in a pure and clean way. They always have something attached to it. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because in one sense, we think, gee, you guys should behave better or treat marriage better. But at the same time, to them it's new and unknown, which is why today's responsive reading talks about the Lord's kindness towards those who are simple-hearted and innocent. So it's a weird push and pull on that. Anyway, as they were therefore discussing it, the first to speak were spirits who could not think of chastity as applying to marriages. And they said, when one sees a beautiful and lovely woman, maiden or married, is there anyone who can chasten the ideas in his thought and so purify them from the lust that he loves her beauty, yet without all that wishing to taste it if he could? Who can turn the instinctive lust that every man feels into chasteness like that, thus into something against his own nature, and still feel love? When love for the opposite sex enters from the eyes and into the thoughts, can it stop at a woman's face? Does it not instantly descend to her breast and beyond? The angels have spoken nonsense, saying that a chaste love like that exists, and yet is the sweetest of all loves, and that is only possible in husbands who are in a state of true married love, who consequently possess an extraordinary sexual ability with their wives. When these husbands see beautiful women, can they hold the ideas of their thought on high any more than others, and keep them suspended, so to speak, to prevent those ideas from descending and extending to that which prompts such a love? After them spirits spoke who were in both a state of coldness and the state of heat, in a state of coldness towards their wives and in a state of heat toward the opposite sex. And they said, what is a chaste love for the opposite sex? Is it not a contradiction in terms when the word chastity is added to love and sex? What is left when a contradictory adjective is added, but something robbed of its proper attribute, which is meaningless? How can a chaste love for the opposite sex be the sweetest of all loves when it is chastity that deprives it of its sweetness? You all know that in what the sweetness of that love lies. Consequently, when the idea naturally accompanying this love is banished, where is the sweetness, and what does it come from? Some of the others interrupted and said, we have been in the company of some very beautiful women, and we have not lusted. Therefore, we know what a chaste love for the opposite sex is. But their companions, who knew their lascivious natures, replied, you were then in a state of antipathy towards the opposite sex, owing to impotence, and that is not a chaste love for the opposite sex, but the final result of an unchaste love. So I want to put these next few paragraphs up on the board here to help you follow along, because I think this is really important to get this. This speaks to a lot of cultural issues, I think, at the moment. Having heard these things, the angels indignantly asked the spirits who were standing to the right towards the south to speak, and these spirits said, "There is a love between men, and also a love between women. And there is the love of a man for a woman, and the love of a woman for a man. And these three pairs of loves are completely different from each other. Love between two men is like love between one intellect and another. For men were created and are so born to become forms of the understanding. Love between two women is like the love between one affection for the understanding of men and another. For women were created and are born to become forms of love for the understanding of men. These loves, namely the love between two men and the love between two women, do not enter deeply into their hearts, but remain outside and only touch. Thus these loves do not unite the two of them interiorly. That is why two men together also spar with each other and with endless arguments, like two athletes boxing, and two women sometimes as well, with endless insistence on their own wishes, like two marionettes battling with their fists. On the other hand, the love between a man and a woman is a love between intellect and its affection, and this enters deeply and unites them. The union is also the love, but a union of the minds and not at the same time of the bodies, or an effort to a union of minds only, is a spiritual love and therefore a chaste love. This love is possible only in those who are in a state of true married love and who consequently possess an elevated sexuality, because men like this, out of chastity, do not permit themselves to feel an influx of love on account of the body of any other woman than their wife. And because they possess a highly elevated sexuality, they cannot help but love the opposite sex and at the same time turn their backs on anything unchaste. Thus they have a chaste love for the opposite sex, which regarded in itself is an interior spiritual friendship. This friendship takes its sweetness from an elevated sexuality, but one that is chaste. These men have an elevated sexuality owing to their total renunciation of licentiousness, and it is chaste because they are only in love with their wives. Now then, because that love in them does not partake of the flesh, but only of the spirit, it is chaste. And because the beauty of a woman, owing to the inherent attraction, enters at the same time into their mind, it is sweet. On hearing this, many of those standing around put their hands to their ears, saying, "Your words hurt our ears. The things you have said are meaningless to us." These spirits were unchaste. But then again, the singing was heard from heaven, and now sweeter than before. But to those unchaste spirits it grated so discordantly that because of the harshness of the discord, they threw themselves out of the theater and ran away, the few spirits remaining being those who in their wisdom loved marital chastity. The end. So, the money points on this story to me are it's pointing out that, hey, there's a difference between love between two men, love between two women, and love between a man and a woman. And, when we have a world today that's trying to make all these things equal, it's turning to a spiritual source like the writings that says, no, these aren't the same thing. And to me, what I see happening in debates on gay marriage and homosexuality within the church is I see a lot of people who are looking for words. Like, for example, you won't find the word homosexuality in the writings, because that word didn't exist back then. So we have passages like this that, though, spell it out. Well, there's a difference between these loves, and these loves of two men do exist. But it's not that deep and connecting love. Cliff forever ago gave us the example of, you can't make a building with just nuts. You can't make a building with just bolts. It's a really good, very obvious example. A seat belt doesn't work if you don't have both ends of it, right? It's a pretty useless seat belt if you have two male ends. And that's the philosophical picture that the writings are saying to us as well. There is something deeper that happens between men and women because we are different and we are complementary and we are wired differently. It's not the same, but it doesn't mean that one's better than the other either, right? complementary. You need the both ends of the seatbelt for the seatbelt to work. So you need both sexes together to make something really special. It's hard to figure out what to do with this in terms of people who are engaging in these, shall we say, unchaste behaviors. Because a lot of people don't know what's going on. They don't have this truth. So it does allow for some flexibility as far as on the mercy side of things to have some compassion towards people who don't have this call, to be raised up spiritually, especially when they seem like they're behaving otherwise fine. But this is telling us, to the church, the people who have a church, that there is a difference, and that some of these things that society says are okay because they're rationalizing through the senses, right? That's what's going on in society. It's the Adam and Eve story, right? They follow the serpent. The serpent is a deception of the senses. They're not raising their intellect up to something higher. That's the fundamental problem. That's why it's at the beginning of the scriptures, right? You know, it's like you're being shoved out into the universe and the world says, okay, the Lord says, off you go, have a great human experience, have a great physical experience. By the way, there's this thing you should be aware of. There's this serpent. He's going to deceive you. It's your five senses. When you start to reason about spiritual things from your five senses, you're going to be taken to wrong places, including stuff like this. It's really important to have this clarity. So if anybody ever debates with you in the church, particularly, about whether some of these things are good or bad, you can always point to Conjugial Love number 55. It's really easy to remember, 55. CL 55 will tell you this story and says, you know what? There is love between two men. There is love between two women, but it's different. And it's not the true married love. And these other things exist, but they don't exist and connect and unite as deeply as between a man and a woman. Amen.